Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Mesa City Council meeting for June the 15th. We have, I believe, Mr. Whitaker on the telephone. Are you there? Thank you. Good to have you with us. And Mr. Winkle is absent and excused. The first item on our agenda is to take action on approving an amortization period under the Public Safety Personnel Retirement System and authorizing the city manager to submit a request to the Public Safety Retirement System Board's administrator for the increased amortization period of 30 years. Gentlemen, good to have you with us.
Good morning, Mayor, council members. My name is Mike Kennington. I'm a CFO here at the City of Mesa. With me, I have Ryan Wimmer, our Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. As you know, earlier this year, the governor signed legislation that allows or gives the option to the City Council to increase the amortization period of the unfunded liabilities for our public safety pension plans. And that's what we'd like to discuss with you today. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Ryan for that discussion.
Good morning. As you know, as Mike mentioned, last year there were a number of reforms to the state pension systems that were passed. This year during the legislative session, the state approved some adjustments to those reforms. And one of those, as Mike mentioned, is the option to extend the unfunded liability amortization period for the city's public safety personnel retirement system plans. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. So what is unfunded liability? The unfunded liability of these plans is the cost of benefits that have already been earned by employees, but they're not currently funded. Put another way, the unfunded liability is the difference between plan assets and plan liabilities. The unfunded liability is calculated each year by PSPRS, so each year we get a new number from them. So it's a bit of a moving target because it changes every year. And the reason it does is because it's based on demographic and financial assumptions such as how much we earn on the investments in the plans, the retirement age of the retirees and employees in the plans, and also other factors like life expectancy. You can imagine if someone lives longer, it costs the plans more, versus shorter lifespan costs less. So in the last 10 years, we've seen substantial increases in the unfunded liability of the City of Mesa's PSPRS plans. You can see in next year, going into next year, which is fiscal year 17-18, the unfunded liability, the combined unfunded liability of our police and fire plans is just above $500 million, so $514 million. So this is a liability that we owe to fully fund the benefits that have already been earned. And just to put that in perspective, if you look at 5 years ago, the unfunded liability was only around a little over 200 million. So,
Excuse me, I think Mr. Thompson has a question for you.
Ryan, why is there such a sharp uptick in the unfunded liability? Is that because there's a lot of people that are suddenly retiring, or is that because the investments aren't covering the liability, I guess?
Mayor Giles, Councilmember Thompson, that's a good question. It's a question everyone's asking. It's not because of the frequency of retirees. On the next slide, we have a list of reasons why it's increased. A lot of the increase has been due to benefit changes that have been approved by the state and also by voters. Last year, there was a proposition that went to voters that in the long run saves costs, but in the short run, it did add to the unfunded liability.
Let me also add, Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, we've also had the two Supreme Court cases that have ruled unconstitutional some of the pension changes. So those have come in the last several years and obviously put a dramatic change in the assumptions as far as how much the contributions are and other items like that.
I have a question.
Yes, Jeremy, go ahead.
Can you guys comment on the management fees last year of the PSPRS and the return last year specifically?
The return for the fiscal year of ending June of 2016 for PSPRS, I believe, was it 0.6 or? That right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 0.6, Councilmember Whitaker. And the management fee, I can't necessarily comment on the exact amount it was. There's been articles written about the how high it is. But I can get you, I can get you those fees, Councilmember Whitaker, afterwards.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that the plan, they do have a very active management style in their investments, so there is a fairly costly fee structure. There's different approaches to managing assets, whether it be passive or active, and PSPRS definitely uses an active strategy, which does tend to cost more. So other reasons why the unfunded liability has increased, Mike mentioned the legal rulings. Many of the reforms from 2011 were overturned in recent years, and that's led to this recent spike that we've seen. Demographic assumptions, as long as your plan includes all demographic assumptions, the unfunded liability shouldn't increase if you were right on, but you're never right on, right? There's assumptions about how much you're going to earn, how much salary increases are going to be, how many employees you're going to have, and all those assumptions are off a little bit one way or the other. So that has added to the unfunded liability. And then as the last item there, return on investment of assets is less than assumed. When you have an active management strategy, it's riskier. You have larger increases, and sometimes you have larger losses in your investments. The unfunded liability going forward, looking into the future, we know it will increase next year. It's going to get worse before it gets better, and that's because of these lawsuits that are still being resolved. You've heard probably of the Hall case or the Parker case. They've been combined into one process. Those are being adjudicated and finished as this week. Last week, we've just got new information. The city will be reimbursing some contributions to employees. They've provided an estimate of $15 million that will the impact of the city of Mesa for our two plans. Also, some people who have retired in recent years will be their permanent benefit increase that they would have received over the last 5 years. Had the reforms not been made in 2011, they'll receive a little bump to their retirement. That's not a big cost.
I'm sorry, Ryan.
Go ahead.
You mentioned a number just a couple of sentences ago, the impact of the most recent Supreme Court cases. Did you say 15 or $50 million?
15.
15,
Mayor.
okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I took my breath away there for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, and these are amounts that'll drop into the unfunded liability. They won't hit us all at once. They'll be amortized over the amortization period for the unfunded liability. Also, we're going to need to reimburse because of the reimbursements we're making to employees. We need to pay interest on those reimbursements because if we would have paid them years ago, there would have been there's a cost to that for the employee not having received it years ago. So we've just been receiving interest. We were just told it'll be around 5% that we'll need to pay interest on those reimbursements. We don't have an estimate of that impact yet, but we will soon. The unfunded liability will also increase in the future due to a lower assumption of return on investments. Next year, the Board of Trustees of the PSPRS system has already decided to reduce the assumption for return on investments from 7.5% to 7.4%, and they've been ratcheting it down for years. It used to be 9% a few years ago, or several years ago. So they've been ratcheting it down steadily over time as the market has been less. Returned less overall on average.
I have one question on that.
Sure, go ahead.
So if I heard you correctly in your last statement, last year they returned 0.6%, but they're adjusting from 7.5% to 7.4%.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson.
And that was similar to so the city's going to have to pay interest of about 5%, but they're estimating that their return on investment's at about 7.5%. Why the discrepancy? Why the 2.5% fluctuation there?
Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, the 5% is actually per statute for these contributions that were overpaid. That's the amount of interest rate that the statute says it's prime plus 1. Prime is currently at 4%, and so it'll be a plus 1, the 5%. So that interest rate that Ryan was talking about is statute driven.
Yeah, and I'd just add, the return on investments on average in the past have returned around the 7-8% range, and that's why the return on investment is in that range. That's not different than most retirement systems. It's a reasonable rate, but I think in the last 7 years the rate of return has been 6.5%, around there, 6.8%. So it has been a little lower than what the assumption return has been, but not dramatically. Last year was a bad year for the market in the fiscal year. This year, the S&P, I was looking yesterday, it's up 16%. And that's not to say that the plan assets will return that next year, because they're not just invested in an S&P index, but the market is dramatically up this past year. So we may see a higher than assumed return this coming year. Which would
I've got one. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just finished speaking.
well, I just say that a higher than assumed investment return would reduce the unfunded liability.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
So, hypothetically, if PSPRS returned $49 million last year and we paid management fees of $125 million, which I believe are the numbers, I'm curious in your opinion, do you believe that PSPRS is performing well?
So this is, Chris, I think we all have different opinions about their performance and in the different markets in which they have to perform. I think we have some concerns about the overall performance, but we also, unfortunately, it's not just the staff at PSPRS, but there's a board that directs the PSPRS. I think there's concern from the cities, certainly the large cities, about whether the representation on the board is looking after the best interest of the cities versus protecting or trying to get the advantage of the beneficiary members. And so we've expressed concern, I think, consistently about, if nothing else, not only the performance, but the uncertainty of where the fund is going and the payments that we're subject to, as you saw in that, not only in that liability chart, but going forward, just it's difficult for municipalities to be able to adjust to these significant fluctuations that we've experienced over the last 5 years. They've been tremendous swings in what we've been told we were going to have to pay or what we're anticipating to pay, and then having the numbers dramatically be different. And I think that goes to a variety of things. It can go to their performance. It can go to the benefits that they are providing the members, the cost of living adjustments or whatever they're called for the retirees. So it's a whole I wouldn't want to suggest that just their performance on their investments is our concern. I would say that could certainly be part of it, but it's a larger spectrum of proposals. But at the end of the day, the city of Mesa has a nominal ability to have any influence on how that changes. And that's why we're here today. This is one of the few things that we have the opportunity to take back and create some of our own control, decision-making process. What we're asking today is consistent with what ASRS performs or what their timeline is today. ASRS performs very well. If you were to ask us about that, we were very satisfied. The percentage of liability that's covered is doing well. But I'm not sure we would all stand and say that we think PSPRS is performing to the best of its abilities and or the best interest of cities. Maybe if you're a member, that might not be the same perspective. But for cities, there's a whole host of concerns that we've had, but with very little impact that we can make or change on those. So yeah, I think we have concerns.
So we've talked a little bit about what the unfunded liability is. We also want to touch on what the amortization period is. It's the period of time over which the unfunded liability is paid off and the plans become fully funded. So you can imagine if you had a 30-year mortgage and you make the required payment, the amortization period is 30 years. So in fiscal year 07-08, 10 years ago, the PSPRS plans had a closed amortization period of 30 years. And closed just means that the last year of the amortization period doesn't change as you go forward. One year it's 30 years, the next year it's 29 years, the next year it's 28 years. It gets smaller and smaller with that end date fixed, so that you end up paying off the unfunded liability at the end of the period. So in fiscal year 7-8, the amortization period was a fixed 30-year period. So next year it's set to be a 20-year closed amortization period. And then it would be 19 and then 18 if we didn't do anything. What the state is allowing for because of this increased unfunded liability, and what we're proposing, is to extend that amortization period to pay off the unfunded liability from 20 years to 30 years.
Ryan?
Right, real quick. So the Hall case, that'll all be lumped together, or is that going to be separate? So, it's,
Yeah, Mayor Giles, Vice Mayor Luna, the Hall case, the impact of the Hall case has not been included in these numbers yet. Next year, we should have all the impacts of the Hall case in the unfunded liability. It will go up from what it is now because there's going to be an impact. But yeah, and that should all come out. It should all be done by the end of this calendar year, I would assume, and it should be in next year's unfunded liability and rates.
so do you anticipate that'll be all folded in together as we extend the payments? Or is that going to be a separate item?
No, we'll see it. We'll see the impact. We'll know what it is. It'll impact additional cost to the city, to the pension fund next year.
But in terms of the extending the payments, is that going to be part
Well,
of it?
what we're suggesting to the council is to request that we'll be allowed to go to the 30-year amortization schedule to give us that flexibility. But what our preference is, that's all we can ask for 30, but our practice would be much less than that. We don't intend to keep it at 30. 30 becomes, frankly, when extraordinary unfunded liabilities hit us, like lawsuits or changes, where we can't absorb that in one fiscal year. We don't want to. But our practice would be, we think, is just take this and do more like a 25-year and take the savings. Even this year, we would if we were to say we're going to go from 20 to 30, we would save $8 million. But we would not go to we would not pay under like a 30-year mortgage. Instead, we'd say, no, we're not going to do that, because obviously eventually there's interest costs that accrues, just like your mortgage, there'd be additional interest costs. We believe a more reasonable approach would be to take and pay as if we're paying out on a 25-year mortgage and 25-year term. We have the flexibility. We can make that decision if we're given the 30-year amortization. We can pay on anything between. And then we would take some of that savings and just hold it, because we think things like the Hall case or other changes would give us some absorption in that fund to be able to absorb those kind of impacts. This year, when we were hit with a $12 million increase, and this is not just one time, it's $12 million. We had to find $12 million in the budget every year from now through in perpetuity. And so that's very difficult to do. This would give us the flexibility to either increase the amortization schedule or to use savings like we're going to accrue if we make this decision now to help absorb that. We believe our practice should be something, 25 or less is what we would do. But the way the statute is, we have to ask for the 30. We ask for the 30, but our practice would be at 25 or less is what we would propose to the council.
As my colleague.
I have a question.
As my colleague mentioned, it wouldn't be, we're essentially doing catch-up, and it wouldn't be precipitous in terms of how difficult we would be paying back the liability, so.
Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you. Chris, what would the increased interest cost be if we hypothetically switched from 20 years to the full 30-year amortization period?
So we believe, this is just estimates, we have not been able to get PSPRS to give us the estimates. So based on our calculations, over the entire life of the bonds, it would increase probably by another $500 million. But that's why we're not interested in doing the 30-year. We're already going to be paying $500 million, even on the 20-year schedule, we'll be paying about $500 million in interest over 20 years. We would not want to add another $500 million in interest over the next 30 years. So that's why we would not suggest that the council or our practice be to pay off on the 30-year schedule. We would agree that it would be much less than that. So it was somewhere between, whatever that 500,000, something, probably half is less, half
As much.
less, whatever, half as much, that's what I'm looking for, sorry. Half as much as that is what we would do. Now, certainly, if the fund is performing well and the cost coming to us, we can absorb and make payments on a 20-year or less payment, and we can always do that. We would certainly do that to mitigate against future interest costs. But unfortunately, the last 5 years, we've not seen that. We've been hit with $5 million, $3 million, and then a $12 million fee above and beyond the normal amortization payments that we were expecting, and that has created very difficult times, and we heard that from the public safety departments. The cuts that we made in public safety this year were directly related not to revenue shortfalls, not the performance of the economy of Mesa, Arizona. Mesa, Arizona economy is doing very well. We're leading the way in building permits, and our sales tax is doing well. But we can't control, this is the one thing we can't control, is this expense that continues to escalate on us without our ability to control it. And so this is the one tool that we'd have to help us absorb that. And we can go either way. If we can get the 30-year, we can get some savings this year. But certainly in the future years, if we have the ability, we could pay it off even sooner.
Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. So with the reserve fund, it gives you the flexibility, what I'm understanding, that you can pay down the principal in the future if you choose to, or whatever you want to mitigate with that money.
Right, we could pay down those bars that you'll see out there, and they extend out into the future. I mean, the difference between, so yes, the goal is to try to, over the next few years, accelerate that 30-year payment and get it down. Well, we don't want to pay at the 30-year. We want to pay closer to 25. And if we can get to 25, maybe in a couple of years back down to 20, then we would do that. We would absolutely do that.
I got one other question.
Sure.
Could the amortization period potentially be dictated in Management Policy 358?
Mayor, Councilman Whitaker, I think what I would suggest is we have, not in the management policy, we actually have a policy, our financial policy with the council that talks about our reserves. It talks about, what else is on there, Mike? There's some other elements that we've established as our financial policy that we publish and we use with our rating agencies. That's where I think would be consistent, is put it in our financial policies that are adopted by council. And if the council would like to adopt it, the policy formally after taking this action, that would be fine with us. That would probably help us in future to provide for that certainty. So we'd be glad to do that.
Okay.
Thank you. Gentlemen, more to your recommendations?
I'm sorry, I kind of gave you a presentation.
Yeah, so just to echo Mr. Brady's words and recommendation, we would, just to give you a little background, the rating agencies mentioned this year, Moody's, in fact, that one of our biggest risks are the increasing pension cost. And all the cities and towns across the state are seeing that same thing. And as Mr. Brady said, this recommendation we have would give us the flexibility to be able to manage that over time if we see spikes, and mitigate the shocks in our budget as we saw this year, so that we're not asking the departments, if we have this reserve fund, to cut. And so that's our recommendation today would be to extend the period, request to PSPRS on their next board meeting, which is June 28th, that we extend it out to 30 years. We would manage that differently, as Mr. Brady said, to the 25 years, and every year we can make that decision.
Okay. Thank you. Jeremy, any additional questions on your end?
No, I'm good. Are we motioning on this today, or is this going to the
Yes.
council next
Yes.
Monday?
No, this is an action item this morning.
Okay.
Yes. Well, I have just one quick thing to say about this. Let me just say amen to something that Mr. Brady said. This is not a City of Mesa specific problem. I don't think I'm not aware of a city in the United States that is not struggling with unfunded public safety pension problems. I know that's not the case in Arizona. Every city in the state of Arizona and town, even more so, is that this is the number one financial challenge of cities and towns in our state and across the nation. So I don't allocate blame for this to our local government. We are in an unfortunate situation where we are forced to participate in state pension plans, and we have no authority to govern those plans and to regulate them and to set policies for them. We just get a bill at the end of the year for financing them. So that's a little frustrating on the part of local governments. It is obviously very expensive to kick the can down the road, and we would all prefer to have a 15-year mortgage to a 30-year mortgage or a 5-year mortgage to a 30-year mortgage. But just to make ends meet and to meet the needs of a fast-growing community, we are again in explosive growth mode. I think we have to look for the flexibility that this allows us. And hopefully, as the economy continues to progress, we can escalate the payments and pay this down as quickly as possible. But to me, the wisdom in having the flexibility here is obvious. So I'm supportive of staff's recommendations. Any other comments from council before we entertain a motion on this?
I've got one last comment.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think the control that we do have is to not take the seriousness off the issue. You know, and I think too often that's what we do as municipalities, is we just kick the can down the road, as you've indicated. You know, this is a $500 million increase to the taxpayers. So I know we're going to vote on this soon, and I just want to apologize to city management in advance. You know, I can't support this, but that doesn't mean that I don't feel the pain that you guys are going through.
It's okay.
Okay. Great. Then is there a motion on this? Mr. Luna?
I move that we approve the amortization period under the PSPRS system and allow the city manager to submit a request for a PSPR retirement board administrator for the increase of the period of 30 years.
Thank you. And seconded by Chris. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. So that passes 5-1 with Mr. Winkle excused and absent. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is, gentlemen, thank you for your presentation. Next item is item 2A, that is to discuss, consider, and vote on the adoption of procedures for hearings on forfeiture of office or other discipline of a council member. Mr. Smith.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. This first agenda item is the procedures set forth and for the Council to consider for adoption for discipline. Really what these procedures do is set forth in greater detail the procedures for discipline that are found in section 206 and 207 of the Charter. I don't tend to go through all of them. I know everybody has a copy. Let me say that they're in many aspects similar to the procedures used by the city for the Personnel Appeals Board for employees. It sets forth, the procedures for scheduling and discovery, and also the hearing. And let me just highlight a couple things regarding the hearing. The hearing, disciplinary hearing, is not a trial. The rules of evidence don't apply. It was intended to be an informal hearing. But it does have many of the aspects of a trial. It has openings, presentation of evidence, and closing arguments. And because of it, it's akin to a quasi-judicial proceeding. At that disciplinary hearing, if that occurs, there won't be any blue cards or public comment because the decision will be based solely on the evidence that is presented by each side. And on the next agenda item, and I'll introduce him here in just a second, the city has retained special counsel to handle that proceeding. Chaz Workin and Susan Goodwin from Partners at Gus Rosenfeld, they're here this morning, and they'll talk to you about the next agenda item if you adopt these procedures. So before you is on agenda item 2A is to adopt the procedures. The next agenda item is the charges. And then if you were to adopt the charges, the disciplinary hearing would happen a month or further out based on calendaring.
Okay. Thank you. I do have a question regarding the proposed procedures. And I think maybe just to clear up or help set public expectations on the timing of things. I think throughout this issue, I have, and our council has asked the public to be patient with us because this is a due process situation and it can't be rushed. And but at the same time, we certainly don't want to prolong it longer than is necessary. So I know the procedures indicate that once we trigger this process, the hearing can occur no less than 30 days after that occurs. And I believe the answer to this is that we will work with Mr. Winkle and his attorney and the witnesses involved to schedule that for the appropriate time, but it will be no less than 30 days after we trigger that process to occur. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mayor.
And there's been some concern raised in emails and social media just in the last few days because of the timing of the process in the Tempe City Court. And there's been some suggestion that we ought to delay our actions today in triggering the process until the culmination of the criminal matter in the Tempe City Court. My impression of that is that I believe there's another hearing that's been scheduled for July, and that matter may or may not be resolved at the new hearing, July 13th, I believe is the date. And that the earliest that our hearing would occur would be perhaps a month after that, sometime around the middle of August. So to me, that seems like, and I don't know that it's critical that we do wait for the criminal proceeding to resolve or not, but assuming that it is, it seems like the timing that we're triggering today still allows us perhaps even a month after that process before our hearing would take place. But and I know we can't predict with certainty what's going to happen in Tempe City Court, so even if that were to be delayed by weeks or a month or so, we have the flexibility to schedule our hearing whenever we want it. And if we determine that it's important that that occur after the resolution of the criminal court matter, we have the flexibility to continue to move that by a few weeks or a month or so to accommodate the resolution in the criminal matter. Is that correct?
Mayor and Council, that's fair to say. Council does have that flexibility. Council does not have to wait for the resolution of the criminal matter. This is not a criminal proceeding, and so, but if Council chose to wait for the resolution of that matter, it could, but does not have to.
So that's a separate question, and we'll get advice from you and from our other attorneys on whether there's a good legal reason either to wait for that to be resolved or not. I guess we don't need to debate the merits of that idea right now, but if we were to conclude that there was some good legal reason to not proceed with the political issue until the resolution of the criminal issue, we have the flexibility to do that.
You do.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions regarding this agenda item?
I have a question on the timing. I received a paid advertisement today on social media from a group called Better Mesa. It appears to me that there's a political action committee being put together to recall Ryan from office. And I reached out to Deanne, I know early this morning, and Jim's office to determine if it was actually a political action committee or what that was in the process. But I don't know if, Jim, if you can comment now, or I know it's short notice, and, you know, how does a recall election affect whether or not we should move forward today? And again, I apologize, this is last minute, but this just popped up this morning.
Councilmember Whitaker, I'll address the first part of your question related to the committee and whether or not they formed an official political action committee. They have not with myself or with the Secretary of State's office. And then I'll let Jim address the recall issue.
Mayor and Council, you know, I guess it's similar conceptually as to the criminal proceeding, is that it's a separate proceeding, and if someone chooses to proceed with the recall process, they can. It's a completely separate process before this council. It doesn't affect the ability of this council to move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Luna.
Just real quick for clarification, do we need to do these separately and prove them separately or together?
This is, right now, it's just agenda item 2A. So 2B, there'll be a separate discussion here in a minute. So yes, there'll be, so this is just the procedures that are before you right now.
So do we need a vote on?
Yes, there needs to be a motion.
Yes, and just so we're clear, I do have several cards to speak on it. I think really that the cards speak more towards, should we do this? The first item is 2A, which is, these are the rules that we're going to follow in the event there is a hearing. So I'm going to hold the cards, and we're going to hear from all the speakers on item 2B, because I think people really want to talk to, should we initiate the process or not the nuts and bolts of how we're going to do it. Just so I can manage the expectations of the people in the room. So if there's no initial comment, yes, Mr. Thompson.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve item 2A. Discuss, consider, and vote on adoption of procedures for hearings of forfeiture of office or other discipline of a council member.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Chris. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Thank you. That passes unanimously. So the next item on our agenda is item 2B. That is to discuss, consider, and vote on charging Councilmember Winkle with conduct constituting grounds for forfeiture of office or other discipline pursuant to sections 206 and 207 of the city charter.
Mayor, if I may, I'll just introduce Chaz Workin and Susan Goodwin from Gus Rosenfeld. They've been retained as special counsel to handle this item.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. As Jim has said, my name is Chaz Workin. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Gus Rosenfeld in Phoenix. With me is my partner, Susan Goodwin. And I know several of you, and you know that I've been a member, a resident, I should say, of this city since 1958. And it is my pleasure to appear before you and to be of assistance to you in any way that I can. As you know, and for the benefit of the members of the audience, I've been retained by the city to serve as special counsel to represent and assist the council regarding a potential charge of conduct constituting grounds for forfeiture of office or other discipline against Councilmember Ryan Winkle. According to the city charter, this council is the judge of the fitness of its members to hold office. The council is therefore the judge of the grounds for either forfeiture of office or other discipline. Under the city charter, there are 4 general grounds for forfeiture of office or other discipline. 2 of them are possibly applicable to Mr. Winkle. One is violation of the code of ethics for council members. The other is engaging in other conduct demonstrating a lack of fitness to hold office. As to the first ground, violation of the ethics code, the code previously adopted by this council states that it is the policy of the city of Mesa to uphold, promote, and demand the highest standards of ethics from all of its officials. Accordingly, all members of the City Council shall maintain the utmost standards of personal integrity, truthfulness, honesty, and fairness in carrying out their public duties. They shall avoid any improprieties in their roles as public servants, and they shall comply with all applicable laws. Another standard stated by the Ethics Code is to reflect on how a council member's actions might be viewed by persons that you or members of the public hold in high regard because of their ethical integrity. The Ethics Code also finally states that honesty and integrity shall be the primary values in all issues. As to the second ground for forfeiture of office or other discipline, which is conduct demonstrating a lack of fitness to hold office, what other conduct demonstrates a lack of fitness to hold office is not defined, and it is not limited by the charter. It is up to you, as members of this council, to determine whether any particular conduct demonstrates a lack of fitness to hold office. With regard to Councilman Winkle, I have gathered and reviewed evidence of his conduct that bears upon his compliance with the city's ethics code and his fitness to continue to hold the office of council member. Based on that review, I report to you this morning that there is evidence of violation of the Ethics Code and of conduct demonstrating a lack of fitness to hold office. In summary, Councilmember Winkle drank very heavily at a public event on the evening of May 7, 2017. Despite the fact that Councilmember Winkle said in a newspaper interview in 2016 that he had, quote, learned his lesson, unquote, after being convicted in 2009 for extreme DUI with a blood alcohol content of 0.23, he decided that evening of May 7th of this year to drive his car from the area of Baseline and I-10 in Phoenix to some location in Scottsdale. While en route, he endangered multiple others, including his wife, who was a passenger in the car, and 3 pedestrians who had to jump out of the path of his car to avoid being hit. Fortunately, before he killed or hurt himself or anyone else, his erratic driving was observed by a Tempe police officer who stopped Mr. Winkle after midnight. As that officer has reported, Mr. Winkle exhibited multiple signs of intoxication, including the odor of alcohol, watery bloodshot eyes, slurred speech, imbalance, and the failure or inability to follow instructions. Based on the officer's observations, including Mr. Winkle's performance of field sobriety test, he was arrested for DUI. Importantly, during the stop and before his eventual release, he repeatedly lied to different officers by denying that he had had anything to drink. Despite denying having had nothing to drink, he refused a breath test at the scene. After transportation from the scene, a blood test was conducted. Blood was drawn from him, and that occurred at about 2 a.m. that morning. That blood was later tested by the Department of Public Safety, and his blood alcohol content was determined to be 0.22. That, as you probably know, is nearly 3 times the so-called legal limit of 0.08. Because his BAC was 0.20 or more, his DUI charge, which that evening he was written up for being under the influence and was eventually charged before the results were known with a blood alcohol content in excess of 0.08. But because the test results have come back in excess of 0.20, his DUI charge could be amended to super extreme DUI. Although it is unknown how much Mr. Winkle had to drink and over what period of time he drank that evening, a DPS forensic scientist has calculated, using Mr. Winkle's body weight and his blood alcohol content, that blood alcohol content equates to him having almost 11 drinks in his system at the time his blood was drawn. And of course, after that blood draw was after his body had been metabolizing alcohol during the time between the stop and the time the blood was drawn. That evidence, which I've just summarized for you, could support these conclusions. First, that Councilmember Winkle violated the city's ethics codes, including in these respects. 1, by failing to obey all laws. He drove while extremely intoxicated, and he made false statements to police officers. And by the way, making a false statement to a police officer is itself a crime. He failed to maintain the high standards expected of council members, and he failed to honor the code's primary values of honesty and integrity by lying to police, telling them that he had not been drinking, and previously by lying to the Arizona Republic and thus to the public, telling everyone that he had learned his lesson from that incident in 2008 that led to his conviction in 2009. Secondly, this evidence could support the conclusion that his conduct demonstrates his lack of fitness to hold office. His drinking and driving demonstrates irresponsibility, extremely poor judgment, and a reckless disregard for the safety of others. Scientific studies have indicated that, have found that the risk of causing an accident when your blood alcohol content is at 0.20 or above increases by more than 80 times. Fortunately, there was no accident and no such tragedy in this case. But that is the risk that Mr. Winkle assumed when he got behind the wheel that evening. Also, with regard to his fitness, this most recent episode of drinking and driving was not a one-time lapse in judgment. As we know, he has done this before. And I think it is fair for you to consider public perception. His conduct has attracted negative publicity, and his conduct may well affect how others view him as a council member and how the public views this council and this city. Finally, lying to the press and to the police, as I've said before, is an ethics violation, and it may also be determined by you to show conduct unfit for office. I would remind you before closing that the purpose of this meeting is to determine whether and how to charge Mr. Winkle. The purpose of this meeting and the purpose of my presentation today is not to determine or go to any discussion of what the ultimate discipline might be. That is for another day. So, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, that concludes my report, and I would be happy to try to answer any questions as special counsel that I can answer in an open session.
Thank you, Mr. Workin. And just so we're clear, the substance of the things that you just discussed are contained in a charging document?
They are.
And that document, do we play a role in approving that document going forward, or you're submitting that document to us and we're now going to respond to whether or not we think that document presents a situation that would justify the consideration of disciplinary action?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, correct. A proposed charge of conduct has been drafted for your consideration. I understand that you all have it, and it, not in the detail that I just summarized, but in a more general fashion, cites the basis for a charge against Councilmember Winkle. And it would be up to you to move and adopt that charge.
Okay, thank you. Council, do we have, before we proceed to receiving public comment, do we have any questions for either Ms. Goodwin or Mr. Workin regarding their presentation?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Jeremy.
I have subpoenas I'd like to request. Is now the proper time for that, or is that later?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your question. Can you say it again?
I have subpoenas that I would like to request.
You would like to request subpoenas?
Yes.
Mr. Workin is...
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the procedures that you adopted earlier this meeting provide for the issuance of subpoenas.
Okay. So, Jeremy, that is allowed under the procedures that we just adopted a moment ago, and so I think you can, given that the hearing is not going to take place for a minimum of 30 days, I think there's no urgency with you making or talking to council about that right now. You can do that over the next few days.
And Mr. Mayor,
Okay, great. So this doesn't have to be done today during study then, is what you're saying?
That's my understanding. Is that correct, Mr. Workin?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, correct. And any such request or suggestions that this body might have, I would ask that those be submitted to my office. Because under the procedures, you have delegated to us as special counsel that power to issue subpoenas.
Right. So, Jeremy, there's not a prosecutor in this situation. But you are our counsel to give us advice and to help us through this process. So if we think that there's a person that we would like to hear from, we should have that conversation with you, and then that can be discussed. And then if the conclusion is reached that that's something that we want to proceed with, you can make those arrangements, including issuing subpoenas.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that is exactly correct.
Okay. Does that make sense, Jeremy?
Yeah, absolutely. I just didn't know if we had to motion to request subpoenas or if that was just something we were delegating out, but it sounds like it's completely delegated. So yeah, I'm good.
Mr. Luna?
Thank you, Mr. Workin. I had a question relative to the timing. You've said 30 days, so are we anticipating that if we initiate a public hearing, it'll occur sometime mid-August, and we're not talking about July? Is that in terms of the timing?
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Luna, that's correct. I believe, of course, under the procedures, the hearing can't be held sooner than 30 days after you bring a charge. But because of scheduling issues, I don't think it's going to be practically possible to have a hearing until sometime in August. I think mid-August are the dates we were looking at.
Thank you. Any other questions before we hear from the public? All right, thank you very much. Stay tuned. We may have some questions for you later.
We will stand by.
Okay. Thank you very much. We do have, and let me welcome to our council meeting. This is a great example of democracy. We love having people come to our council meetings and expressing their points of view. So we hope everyone feels welcome and that this is a safe place for everyone to come and share their opinions. So I'm just going to start at the top of this stack. There's no strategery that's gone into the mayor deciding who gets to speak first or last. I think we've got about 15 or so cards. There is a time limit of 3 minutes per speaker. There's no obligation to take the entire 3 minutes. I have a feeling that after a few people speak, we're going to be hearing reoccurring themes over and over again. So feel free to take as much time as you feel is appropriate, up to 3 minutes. And the rules are: you come forward, you state your name and your address, and then there's a clock, and I think you can see it there. And at the end of 3 minutes, because we have so many people that are speaking, I will be rather strict in enforcing the 3 minute time limit. Okay? So the first card I have is Kiana Maria Sears. Kiana, thank you for your service on the school board. It's good to have you with us.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Luna, and all council members. I come today speaking as a citizen of Mesa and one that serves the entire city of Mesa and serve our children in the future. The reason why I'm here, obviously, it's a hot seat for me, and it's one where I am very nervous about what this looks like as a leader in our community. I do say on this issue, I was angered, I was disappointed, I'm still hurt about the actions of our fellow council member. And because I consider all of you my council members, because I feel like we all serve in this together. Why I decided to come tonight, today, after staying up all night, is because I do believe in restorative justice. The stain that's already happened, and what has happened with our city and the unwelcomed attention that's come to the city of Mesa is something that has happened. And when I think about restorative justice, I think about our millennial population and children that's coming up. And the one thing that I often see, especially with schools and suspension, is no accountability to right the wrong that's happened. When a student breaks a desk, a lot of times they're actually suspended for vandalism, rather than creating a new desk and having the pride of restoring and making it right and actually taking that accountability for what's happened. So today, that's what I think about. I think about that other disciplinary action. How do we, as a city, say, this is wrong, this just never happened, we're in the spotlight, but we will make the best of this. We will, per se, not the best analogy, but hold Council Winkle's feet to the fire and say, make good on this. This attention that's unwelcome is one that you bought. Now, every day, do what most of us do as public servant. Get out there, work harder, twice as hard, and doing the job that then the people have put your trust in, what you were elected to do, and overcome this barrier. I do believe that this is an egregious act, but it can be overcome because things happen every day. And I think to say, okay, let's not let you be here, no longer be a part of Mesa, no part of the decision making. You just go away and we forget and act like this never happened. That will never happen. It's happened. It's in the public. I realize right now I'm on camera because it is public. So now what I feel we're charged to do as leaders and what you are charged to do and what I would love to see you do is do that other disciplinary action, which is hold this council member responsible for making it right. Restore the loyalty, the trust, make the branding better. And I believe we as a city are strong enough and have the capacity to do that. That's my comment today. And I do know that my voice is one in which I will get some backlash because I do represent children. But I made this tough decision to come today because I believe we are innovative enough to do something different, make the best out of an unfortunate situation.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kiana. And I apologize, I forgot to mention the other rule, which is we don't clap. We want to have an environment here that is not intimidating to anyone, regardless of their point of view. So we're not going to turn this into a pep rally for either one side or the other. So I understand there's strong feelings here, and I appreciate that. But if you could please, we want to make the environment one that's welcoming to everyone, so we're not going to allow you to clap or to cheer or to do things like that. Next is Drex Davis.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Drex Davis, and I live at 6909 East Portia Street, Mesa, Arizona 85207. I've been a resident of Mesa for nearly 4 decades. In 2002, my pregnant wife and I were driving down a road when a drunk driver ran a stop sign, his car on a collision course with ours. I slammed on my brakes, decelerating the car just enough that he missed striking us by mere feet. He was later apprehended. That experience has haunted me and gives me great empathy for the 3 pedestrians that Mr. Winkle nearly struck. The lives of my wife and I and our unborn child almost ended, all because a reckless individual decided that his need to send a several-ton piece of metal hurtling over the Earth's surface while he was high on alcohol was more important to him than our laws or mine and my wife's life. Mr. Winkle has been apprehended for driving while high on alcohol 2 times. After the first time, he said he learned his lesson. He didn't. Now he wants a 3rd chance. He says it won't happen again. He says the second incident was a one-time slip. But that's unlikely for 2 reasons. The first is that the FBI and the CDC both released studies this decade that showed that the average drunk driver drives drunk more than 80 times each time before they are apprehended. That would mean Mr. Winkle likely drove drunk many times after his first arrest before he was finally arrested again. The second reason that it's highly unlikely is because he has an honesty and credibility problem. I watched the police body cam video taken on the night of his second arrest, where he was repeatedly asked by police if he had been drinking. Over and over again, he looked them in the eye and lied. Whatever credibility he once had is gone. And it's for this and for the wanton disregard for law and life that he is unfit for office. Because he has not done the right thing and resigned, the council must now do the right thing and remove him from office. Mr. Winkle's supporters say that his love of his job and his effort to perform it trumps his moral failings. But his first and primary job was to honor and protect law and life and represent our city with honor. He was given a second chance. He failed. I have full confidence that the council will do the right thing, the thing that Mr. Winkle should have done but failed to do, remove himself from office. I trust you will send a message that holding public office is a privilege and that repeatedly endangering the lives of citizens will not be rewarded. There are over 464,000 residents in Mesa, the vast majority of whom love and respect law and life and who tell the truth. We will be just fine with a new resident on the council. I wish Mr. Winkle the best in his post-political life. I hope he will pay his debt to society and start his life over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Next is Derek
I have a
Rose.
question.
Okay,
The speaker is Drex Davis, is that correct?
correct. Do you have a
Does he have
question?
any affiliation to a Better Mesa?
I'm happy to answer that. I do not have an affiliation to a Better Mesa.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. And yeah, thank you, Derek. Come forward. This is, the format here is a little different than items from citizens present. Mr. Smith, correct me if I'm wrong. Under items from citizens present, we can't engage in any dialogue or ask questions or make corrections if there's misstatements of facts or whatnot. We can in this format because we're speaking about an agenda item. So there is some amount of dialogue that is not illegal in this context. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, the call to the public under the open meeting laws, you can't follow up on, except for very limited circumstances, but this is an agendized item, so yes, you can.
Okay. So council, if something that one of these speakers says provokes a question on our part, it's not illegal for us to ask those questions. Is that correct, Mr. Smith?
It's permissible, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Brosman, welcome. Three minutes.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, thank you for the opportunity today to speak. First, I want to say I really don't want to be here. I don't think you want to be here either discussing this. I really wish the right thing had been done and Mr. Winkle had stepped down versus put us all in this precarious position. I live at 639 West Contessa here in West Mesa, just a rock throw from Ryan's district. And I'm very disappointed in what has transpired. The first thing is the costs that are associated with this, the special counsel costs, the time, the reputational risk that we're going to receive from this, the economic fallout that could potentially come from this, the businesses that may want to move to our area that see this mess. It should never have happened. Not only that, it should be moved by very quickly. I think when we talk about the code of ethics violations, the first thing that I thought about was the alleged lying directly to the police officer. Mr. Davis alluded to that, and others have, a special counsel, that it wasn't one time, it was multiple times to a police officer. What do we demand from our public officials? This is beyond unacceptable. Not only that, the safety costs, the potential lives that were put at risk. I'm extremely bothered by this, and I like Ryan personally, so I'm bothered that I even have to be here. Mr. Winkle asked for another chance. It's not a first, it's not a second, it's a third. It's time that we move on. He's been in the council for a very short period of time. We can find somebody to move us forward. I would ask that the council do their job at this point, an unfun job, and remove him from office as expeditiously as possible. We need to get on with the business of the city, and it's important that we have the next member sitting there. So please, as you listen to the comments, understand that I think the lion's share of us neighbors do not want a potential city council member on a work release program coming to work. That's unacceptable. We do better, we can do better. We are a shining light for the rest of the state. Let's keep it that way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Jackson Wright.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilman. Thank you for having me here today. Just wanted to reiterate some things that have been spoken to. A lot of what the special counsel said was exactly what I had planned to bring forth, and it doesn't need to be repeated. I would just say amen to his comments, a lot of what Derek had said, and Drex as well. I want to talk about a third issue and possibly a fourth issue on the code of ethics that I personally see as an issue. Partly by Mr. Winkle not taking the responsibility upon himself to remove himself from office and resign. Number 3 states loyalty. Elected officials and advisory board members have an obligation to put the interest of the city of Mesa over all personal consideration. By not removing himself, by being an absent voter, by not being able to do his job, he is putting his own risk or his own interests of staying on council above that of the city. In my opinion, that is an additional code ethics violation. I would also caution that as council members, you are judged in this situation. I would encourage you to expeditiously put this forward to remove him from office, as well as is your job to put the best interest in the city of Mesa. The other part of that is legal compliance with being able to attend meetings. In a normal situation where he hadn't been excused from meetings, he has already missed many meetings and will miss many further meetings by either mandatory jail sentencing or through some type of work release program. But it looks like it might be August or further before he is able to sit in on a council meeting to put forth a vote, and that he is at this point and continually will be unfit by simply not being here. Although it is excused at this point, that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt the city of Mesa or the opportunity to have a full council represented and represent the city. I live here in District 1, again, a stone's throw from Mr. Winkle's district. My office is across the street from his district. So I'm represented by not only my family, but also my business, and we are not being represented by a full council in the city of Mesa. So I encourage you to do what Mr. Winkle could not or has not yet done, and please remove him from office. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Glenna Valpy. Okay. Glenna, are you still here? If someone sees Glenna, please let her know that we'd like to hear from her. Next is Jonathan Valpy. Perhaps they're together. Okay. Next is Jill Snyder. All right, Jill Snyder. Nancy Cottle. Welcome, Nancy.
Mayor Giles and City Council members. My name is Nancy Cottle. I live at 8335 East Culver Street in Mesa, and I'm speaking on behalf of Nancy Clay, a Mesa mother who couldn't be here today, but wanted her voice to be heard, and it is my honor to share her story. Mesa has been placed in a tough spot by the recent actions of City Council member Ryan Winkle. On May 7th, he was arrested on suspicion of DUI after police observed him nearly hit 3 pedestrians while driving erratically. Disturbing arrest video shows him lying to the police about drinking, though his wife admitted he was intoxicated. She then asked for special treatment, telling police to let him go, and I quote, because he is on the city council and he supports the unions and your pensions. Winkle's super extreme DUI blood alcohol was 0.22, nearly triple the legal limit. Worse, this is the second time that he's gotten an extreme DUI. We can't know how often he has chosen to drive intoxicated. Does anyone believe he happened to get caught the only 2 times that he did it? Your job today must address his behavior. He has orchestrated a campaign to bombard you with messages of support, but outside of his loud little echo chamber, most people are upset. Reader responses to news stories and social media show close to 90% demand he resign. Second chances come easily in our society, but Ryan Winkle is asking for a third. Third chances should require real consequences, soul searching, and evidence of deep change at one's core. Redemption takes much more than a weepy press conference, a decidedly unrepentant pressure campaign, and a voluntary paid suspension. Why is Nancy Clay so passionate about this? Her son, Specialist Cale Clay, died at the hands of a drunk driver in 2010, the year after Ryan Winkle did jail time for his first extreme DUI. Cale was a soldier. He had just gotten home safely from a dangerous tour of duty in Iraq, during which she worried and prayed daily for his safety. She was very relieved that he was going to be home for a while before heading back to Afghanistan, and never did she expect to lose him to drunk driving. Such a waste. We lose more lives to DUIs than gun violence or other things that we seem to worry about more. Nancy Clay thinks about her son every day and does not want anyone else to go through this pain, nor do I. This is why Ryan Winkle should be removed from office. He's lucky he didn't kill anyone. He's been given a third chance, the chance to recover fully, heal his badly wounded moral compass, and move on. He's wished the best, but the best for him and for Mesa won't come from half measures. That's why he should be removed. Thank you on behalf of Nancy Clay and myself.
Thank you. Next is Cheryl Walsh. Oh, I'm sorry. Some folks check the box, they don't want to speak, so that's my mistake. I apologize. So thank you for being here and expressing your opinion via the card. Next is Sandra Fisher. I'm sorry. Yes, Cheryl Walsh did not wish to speak, but she's a resident of District 3, and she opposes Mr. Winkle's removal because he needs to remain. I'm sorry. Sandra, welcome.
Thank you. Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. My name is Sandra Fisher. I live at 959 West Peralta Avenue in Mesa, 85210. I am a resident of District 3, Ryan's district. I have been so for 21 years. I have known his predecessor, and I have known the work that he does. I am here to say there has to be another alternative to removing him from office. While I do understand the severity of what he did, the severity of drunk driving, I know that he has definitely worked towards making amends, not only just press conferences or whatever, but he has chosen to accept whatever sentence he has received. He has worked towards that. He is going to be doing some jail time. This is not going to be an easy time for him or his family. So he is doing what we should expect of a person that has done this. I believe that he has learned his lesson, and I do believe that District 3 residents will hold him accountable. I believe that he represents my interests on this city council better than any of you. And I want him to stay because of those things that I believe are important for Mesa and for this city as a whole, but especially in my district. And that it should be our residents that make that decision as to whether he should stay or not, versus the council itself. And in that, I believe another alternative is appropriate. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Thompson.
You know, I would like to make, just to say something, just to kind of get it off my chest a little bit, because we've all been getting inundated with emails, and we hear a lot about it should be the residents of Mesa, of District 3 that decide on Mr. Winkle's fate and no one else. Mr. Winkle makes votes on this council, every single council meeting that impacts every citizen in this district. So the citizens in my district, the citizens in Mr. Glover's district, and the other districts have just as much say and just as much, or the ability to say what they believe the proper discipline would be. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's not just the District 3 residents, but it's his decisions impact every single resident in the city of Mesa. So.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Next is Becky Pettit.
My name is Becky Pettit. I live at 837 East Jasmine Street in Mesa. I've known Ryan for over 30 years. I used to watch him play with Legos and talk to him about his future. And I remember thinking how impressed I was as he was a young man and what a great future I thought he would have. Later on in life, I have been to his house and held his son. I have known him for a long time and I know him well. When I heard he was running for office, I told my son I was going to help him. And my son said, "But Mom, he's a Democrat. You've never voted for a Democrat. And you want to make calls for him? You hate those calls. You detest those calls. Why would you make calls for him?" And I said, "I'm not voting for a Democrat. I'm not helping a Democrat. I'm helping Ryan." Ryan has a bachelor degree in urban development, sustainability, a multilingual minor. He got his master's in business administration while campaigning and starting a family. I am sure that he is capable of handling this DUI as well as being a councilman. The first speaker was very articulate in what she said when she said, yes, he needs to be accountable. He needs to be having his foot to the fire. But I don't think the best thing for Mesa is having him gone. Every day on Facebook, for the last 3 years, even in 2014, every day he posted things about Mesa that were amazing. One day it could be, there are 87 places along the light rail to eat. Go check them out. Help our people. They're hurting because of the light rail construction. Another day it would be, hey, did you know that there's a multicultural center in between Main Street and Southern on Dobson? I never knew, but every day he posted something. Every day he posted, hey, go check this place out, trying to help the people who are struggling as the light rail was being built. I'm pretty sure that all of you are concerned about, yes, we do need to protect Mesa, and yes, he does need to have some kind of punishment. There needs to be consequences. But is the best situation to have him removed? No. Make him do more due diligence and work harder to make everybody proud of him. There's people who say, yes, he had a DUI, he had 2 DUIs, he needs to go. Mothers who've lost their children, families who lost family members, I understand that, I truly do. I'm LDS, I've never drank in my life. Believe me, I don't agree with drinking. But none of us are without sin. None of us have not made mistakes. We need to look at the greater good. I think we need to think about what he can do for Mesa with all of his credentials and with all of his humanity and try to do the best we can for that. There's only been one man in the history of Mesa that has been kicked out of office in 134 years, and it was for a felony. It was for a crime. Give him consequences. Give him things he needs to do, but please don't take that away from him. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pettit. And I note that you have a card from your husband as well, who does not wish to speak. Just in terms of correcting some factual statements, I had the unfortunate situation to serve on our city council 20 years ago when an individual was removed from office. And just so the record is straight, that individual was not charged with a crime. It was not a felony. There was no criminal conduct alleged in that situation. That's okay. It's an honor. I just, rather than perpetuate rumors, I just thought, as facts come up, we'll just try to keep, we can all have difference of opinion, but we'll share the same facts, okay? Next, Augie Gastelum. Gastelum. Augie? Oh. Okay, thank you. So Augie had to leave, but he wished to speak in favor of Mr. Winkle. Thank you. Jennifer Duff.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Jennifer Duff, 146 West 2nd Street, a resident of District 4. I come here on behalf of speaking in favor of Mr. Winkle staying on council. This is not a judgment of whether he was guilty or not. That is decided by the law, and it has been decided, and he's serving a sentence. It's more of a question of, does he have the capacity to serve the job as a council member? I think he has proved in his campaign and his service in his district that he has gone above and beyond what a council member can do and can be. He has excelled. He has set the bar very high for all of us in our service to our community and what a council member can be. So I ask, does he have the capacity going forward? Can he do the job? I think even more so now. In his error, he can be a powerful voice to bring attention to this critical subject that affects us all. And we all don't have to look very far in our own lives of people that need a second chance. And those who do get that second chance, and I've been one that has given a second chance to someone who's erred on the side of the law, and how powerful and how a great resident and community member and how they give back even more so. He can set a standard for what we can be as a community in standing for each other and raising our expectations of each other and taking care of one another. So I must say, you know in your heart that he can do the job, and he is capable of being an excellent council member and speaking for the community that he represents. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Next, David Crummy.
Mayor, council members, I didn't come expecting to speak. First of all, I felt a little bit embarrassed that our special counsel, because of his tact and demeanor and his way that he's putting that, sounds less like counsel and more like a prosecutor. And so I was very surprised and taken aback at that, having seen this play out in other cities. But I do have a deep worry about the politicalization of this issue. We've seen unprecedented money from outside groups pushing a political agenda that honestly started with the council member's election. I'm worried about the precedent that this sets, at the signal it sends that council can remove another council member above the will of the voters. I looked at the small group that is formed to foment opposition against the council member, and while they won't say who's funding them or who they are or where they are, we're being bombarded by paid advertisement for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And that's just what I see. The thought about removing an elected official is an extremely difficult issue, and sorry, I didn't prepare my thoughts, but it's an extremely difficult issue, and I wonder about the overall wisdom of superseding the voters and the residents by the thoughts of 6 men. Not just in this example, but the precedent it creates for the future. The charter is really vague in this place, as the council member mentioned, and it can be used for political purposes, and that's really worrying about the precedent that we're preparing by doing this. I also am very worried about interrupting due process, circumventing our Constitution and the precedent it issues, and any issues of double jeopardy. And will this affect any judicial proceedings and the chance of a fair trial in our court of law? But overall, thank you, council members and mayor, for serving our community. Greatly appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a comment.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I just want to remind everybody that the charter that we took an oath to protect does unilaterally give council on a 5-7 vote the ability to remove council members. You know, and I agree with David that it's an extremely dangerous amount of power to have, but the charter does give us that power. So I just want to remind everybody that's here today, you know, that the council does have this power, and that's how the process is going to unfold.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think Mr. Workin cited the provisions of the charter, and so did Mr. Smith earlier. So it's a pretty settled legal question as to our role in this situation. Any other comments? Lydia Kearney.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Council, Vice Mayor. I live at 919 West Kiva, which is in District 3. I wanted to make my comments here today because I think it's important. I am a citizen of Mesa who currently and for the upcoming future does not have representation in this city. You all will be representing me. Ryan Winkle will not be. Even if he remains on, as far as I'm concerned, he's a repeat criminal drunk, and he will not represent me. So if I have any questions, if I have any problems with the city of Mesa, the mayor will be hearing from me directly. It's just very disturbing. The police here in Mesa are constantly having to deal with drunks on the road. people in Mesa have to deal with having their family members killed and maimed by drunks. Ryan Winkle can take the opportunity on his own time. This is his second offense that he has been caught at, and in my opinion, either he is the most unfortunate person in the world, that he has been caught only twice in his life drunk driving, or he is a habitual drunk. Additionally, I'll make one more quick comment. I have forwarded this information to the mayor directly in an email. The people who surround him are very aggressive as far as protecting him. I have been on his Facebook page. I have dealt with him directly with my beliefs on Facebook and messaging him, and I call him a drunk. It's part of, accepting the fact that you're a drunk, is to accept the fact that you're a drunk. And his support from his wife on down is very weirdly aggressive to people who are stepping up to him. And I have had a couple of incidences where I have been threatened, one of which I've sent directly to your office because I copy-pasted the page. And the person posted my home address, my home phone number, with physical threats to me. And that cannot be accepted. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Amy Lynn Castro.
Thank you, council members and mayor. It's actually Amalyn Castro. I am a new voter to Mesa, actually transitioned from Arcadia to live in Mesa based on the actions of Ryan Winkle. Not only did he show me what community was, just by his participation in Mesa, he was Mr. Mesa before he started to run. Everybody knew this man loved his community, not by what he said or by PR events, but by the actions that he takes in his community every day. I not only got involved in the political process and started campaigning for him, but for other council members as well. I said, I want to be a part of this Mesa community that chooses an individual like Ryan Winkle to serve his community. Again, this man is out there patronizing those businesses in his district. He's looking to solve problems. He's listening to the public, which is complaining, I know. A lot of the times you guys feel that, oh, they're just complaining. But those complainers, or the people that are voicing their needs, are his citizens, are his neighbors. Those are the ones that he cares about. Now, when a person has an individual specific action happen in their lives, it brings humanity to them. And we as a community look at them and says, how is this representative of what's happening in our community? And yes, it has been mentioned that there is a problem in Mesa as far as the drinking culture and as far as the DUIs. But do we lock them all up and ostracize them from our community? Do we say, that's it, you're a drunk, you're a problem maker, get out, and we'll deal with the people that we want to work with? No, we find some way to rehabilitate our citizens and find the good ones willing to serve and do something for the collective. Rather than just trying to create a brand or trying to cut some ribbon on some opening and say, here I am serving in the public eye. No, in the behind the scenes serving his community members. I'm very passionate about what Ryan does, and yes, I support him because I have been so disheartened and looking at politics as a waste of our American time. It's run by a couple of people that decide to do things along with their lines of values and forget about the rest of the public. Where Ryan said no. He says, I'm going to do grassroots. I'm going to get out there and spend those times not relying on somebody to pay me to campaign, but to get out there and spend my time with my community. He did that, and he is an outlier on this panel. I understand that. His views and policies are not what everybody else believes. We know that in the votes that have been cast, and we know that from what he stands. So I understand that he's an outlier, and it would be so easy to get rid of Ryan Winkle. Just push him aside, let him spend his jail time, and on his own time, he can solve his personal problems. But he decided to be a leader. So on his own time, he's been working for Mesa, even though he has not been attending these meetings, and he has been given this leave. He is still working day in and day out for the citizens of Mesa. So I ask you, please consider a way that he can be rehabilitated and continue to serve, and not ostracized, because that is not a message we want to send to our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelin. Next is Rosa Sankari.
Hi, my name is Rosa Sankari. I live at 540 North May Street, and I am a member. I live, play, and work at Mesa District Number 3. Today, it has been 2 weeks since I had a baby via C-section. This is my first outing. This is how committed I am to Ryan. He has inspired me to be part of the community. I have lived in Mesa for the past 5 years. I own my home free and clear, and I have never been involved in politics at all. I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I have no affiliation until this year, when Ryan showed me what passion is, what it is to be a leader in the community, what it is to care about the people that you serve. I am 40 years old, and I have never voted until this election. I am a business owner, and because of the passion that I see that Ryan has for this city, which I did not, even though I live here, I learned to love my city. I learned to be part of my community. And because of that, my business is relocated to District 3, from Scottsdale to Mesa, Arizona. I support Ryan. My family supports Ryan. And I would like to make sure that Ryan keeps serving the community, because he's somebody that cares about the community, regardless of who we are, what gender we are, what sex do we like, what religion affiliation we're with, and what our economical status we are. So I am proud to have a council member that represents us in the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else here that would like to fill out a blue card and have anything to say? Okay, thank you very much. The next, like I said, the item that's on our agenda today is just to, do we go forward with having a disciplinary hearing? There's no determination of guilt or innocence or consequences or anything like that today. It's just beginning the process. And I don't want to say a whole lot, because I think it's inappropriate to say a whole lot, because we are, at this point, a judge and a jury. And so the thing that I need to say is that I will, at the right time, at the conclusion of the evidence, I will do my very best to give the right vote in how to proceed here, assuming that we decide to go forward. But I do want to say a couple of things, and that is, I don't know anyone who doesn't like Ryan Winkle. Okay, honestly, I don't know a soul who doesn't. So I hope that everyone understands that this is not a personal thing. This is not a political thing. There's no hidden agenda here. There's nothing inappropriate on the part of the council. This is an issue that we are charged with addressing per our city charter. And nothing more than that. And it's a very unpleasant situation. None of us want to be doing this at all. There's a lot of really positive things that we would rather be doing with our time and energy as a Mesa City Council. But unfortunately, it is our job, and we will do our job. So I just hope everybody understands that. If there's some suspicion that there's something else going on here, I assure you that is not the case. Okay, council, any other comments, or would someone like to proceed?
I got one last comment before
Yes.
we proceed.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
There's been allegations of a Better Mesa paying for advertisements, and I think that requires forming a political action committee. I know this is slightly unrelated to the situation, but I just would like request that the city attorney look into this to make sure that everything is being done legally.
Okay. And I guess, Mr. Smith, the question is, if there's a recall election and there's a group that's advertising and seeking to influence the outcome of an election, that's one thing. But I don't think to this point, the decision, what was announced earlier is there is, at this point, no organization for a recall election. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. And I can clarify that there is a threshold for contributions and expenditures before a committee is required to be formed by state law.
And how much is that?
$1,100.
Okay. So Facebook advertising is notoriously inexpensive. So at this point, I'm not sure there's been any, well, Jeremy, that's a great question to ask, and we'll let you and Mr. Smith have that conversation.
I know it's not relevant right now. I'm just saying, like, I think that should be looked into. I get that we're moving forward with something else.
Okay, great. Is there a motion to charge Councilmember Winkle based on and as set forth in the charging document entitled, quote, charge of conduct constituting grounds for forfeiture of office or other discipline action against Councilmember Winkle, close quote, and to approve the charging document? Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? Thank you. That motion passes. So as was indicated earlier, we will now work with Mr. Winkle and his attorney to set a hearing that will take place no sooner than 30 days from today. Is there a motion?
Unanimous, John?
I'm sorry, Jeremy?
Was that unanimous?
Yes, it was.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you, Mr. Luna, Mr. Freeman. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
Aye.